So now, Starting from Scratch is a Touchstone trade paperback from Simon and Schuster, which will be released August 3rd. And we're talking to her from her home in Rochester, New York. And Susan, I want to say welcome. I'm a Buffalo gal, so I know Rochester very well.
Oh, sure.
So it's really nice to have you with us. So can you start off by giving us a brief overview of the story?
Sure. This novel is about someone who is an adult, a young adult who loses her mother unexpectedly, and sort of the shifting of family dynamics that occurs after the death of that mother, among the adult siblings, the remaining family members, and ties in a lot with the mother's love of food and gourmet cooking and so on.
Well, I thought of my own mother when I was reading this book, and the way that you captured the writing of the recipes with the little notes from the mother. Did you get that idea from someone in your family, or?
I think a lot of us probably write lots of notes in the margins of our recipes or our cookbooks, and my mother certainly did. I have a cookbook that had been hers, and I love to see what she wrote. So probably I did get that from her.
Well, it's interesting, too, because being from New York State, some of my mom's recipes were similar to the recipes in this book. And I think a couple of them might be something that was popular in that part of the country at the time of mothers and grandmothers. Tell us what the meaning is behind the title, Starting from Scratch.
Well, I think with the death of her mother, the main character, whose name is Olivia, she really loses her bearings. It's an unexpected death. She loses her sort of sense of orientation in her life, and she's the touchstone of her existence. And she really is starting over. She is trying to locate herself now. How does she go forward without that touchstone? And she's doing it by engaging in one thing that she and her mother really shared, which is the cooking. She puts herself in her mother's kitchen and really doesn't want to leave, which worries the rest of the family somewhat.
Well, and something very important was going on with the main character too, that she didn't tell the family about right in the beginning. And what was that? What was she working toward?
That's right. She had moved up the date of her dissertation defense, which is a little unusual to be able to move it up. Most people don't finish early, I think. She was able to do that, and her mother knew that. It was sort of this thing they were going to surprise the rest of the family with, but then her mother died before she could even tell her mother that she passed. And at that point, the point of even telling anybody, sort of to her, it just seems pointless and
Sure.
irrelevant. Yeah.
Yeah. What importance did food hold for your family when you were growing up?
I think food was definitely a comfort thing, and I found it immensely satisfying to wake up on Saturdays sometimes to the smell of my mom's homemade vegetable soup or something,
Right.
different things that she would make, caramel rolls and things like that she would make, and I associated really good things with those things. She was not a gourmet cook like Olivia's mother, but I really liked what she made, and so it was a good thing. Right now, my husband and I have a different experience. We're kind of struggling to keep food from being a battleground because we have a little boy who's very picky. So that's a new territory for me because we weren't really picky when I was growing up.
Right. And
yeah.
as kids growing up, we didn't think of gourmet cooks. We just knew our mom and our grandmother was a good cook.
Exactly, yeah.
What's your favorite recipe in the story?
In the novel, that's kind of hard.
Yeah.
I did include just a very simple recipe for chicken broth, chicken soup, and that's something that I've just made so much my whole life. You use it in so many things. I really liked the recipe for chocolate puddle, it's called, which is a chocolate skillet cake.
That was a funny name.
Yeah, it does kind of have a puddle sort of look to it when it's cooking, and that was something I learned as I was researching for the novel. I learned how to make that, and it's delicious. I really like that one.
Where did you find that recipe?
I think I tweaked it from something that I found online at some point.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the other thing, too, about growing up in that part of the country, there's a lot of cold weather there. And a lot of the comfort foods that we've grown up with in cold weather sometimes doesn't translate well to other parts of the country. But I still find myself, when I don't feel well, making a chicken soup that's
Yeah.
similar to yours. And comfort food and food from your childhood is so important. Now, just for those of you just tuning in, I'm talking to Susan Gilbert-Collins about her first novel, Starting from Scratch. And we're talking about, it has some recipes in it, and this is by Touchstone Book, Simon & Schuster. It's coming out on August 3rd. And it's really quite a story. You write about some very dark subjects, death, grief, and molestation. Did you find it difficult to strike that balance between those subjects and then the overall fun, humorous tone of the book?
I think I really did that deliberately, because I think I really wanted to write about someone's experience of grief. I was afraid, though, that the novel could sort of sink beneath the emotional weight of that. And if you just try to write about grief straight up and you don't temper it at all, I think it can be hard to take it in. So I sort of deliberately did try to strike that sort of humorous tone at least some of the time.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point that you make, because anything about grief can be overwhelming, and certainly when it's the loss of a mother, it's overwhelming as well. Now, your main character is the youngest sibling. Are you the youngest? You have siblings?
I am the youngest. I have two siblings. I don't have three like Olivia. I just have two, but I am the youngest, and I think it's a defining experience, definitely.
Probably so. Everybody says that about their youngest, their oldest, the middle one, and everything else. Are there any similarities between your fiction family and your own? Did you take from any of that to use in the novel?
I did take some things. I certainly fictionalized them. It's not an autobiography at all. But
No.
I certainly drew on our experiences. And I think the biggest similarity may be that my family was very whole, very intact, and that's something that's true of Olivia's family, and I think that's getting more rare these days. I also think the one way in which my mother was very much like Olivia's mother is that she was a really good listener. But otherwise, she really wasn't like that character. She wasn't this sort of outgoing, intrepid force of nature.
Yeah, well, like you say, it's not a memoir. It's not a biography, but certainly it does make sense that you would draw from that. Now, are you going to be going on a book tour?
I'm definitely doing a few signings. I'm sort of doing them where I will be. Anyway, I go back home to South Dakota, where I'm from, and to Minnesota. I lived in Minneapolis for a few years. I'm going to be going back there at the end of September and doing some things there, and looking forward to the first signing next week here in Rochester, New York.
Oh, I bet you are. That's really exciting. So, are you going to be talking about your book also, or just doing a signing? How are you going to do that?
I still need to get details from the places that we've been setting things up with, so I'm not sure. I think maybe a very brief reading, that sort of thing.
Well, I want to let our listeners know, because certainly your people in Rochester, all over the world, can hear the interview, and they can find us on the web at kptr1450.com. And catch what Susan has to say, and it's always fun doing a signing, and I'm sure being in your hometown, it will be even more fun for you. There's another recipe in the book that I've never seen this before, and I was wondering if this is something else that you found somewhere on the web, or if it's something that a friend gave to you. It's called late night fried spaghetti.
I love that. I actually make that a lot for my family. I
gotta try it.
It's a good one, and actually I found it once in a tiny little spiral-bound Italian cookbook, just a tiny little thing. I don't even know where it came from, and it was in there. At least the original was in there. I may have tweaked it since. you know how you do with
Sure,
recipes. But
of course.
it's actually, it's kind of one of our favorites, and it's really easy. You sort of throw it together, and it's got a neat texture. The pasta has a slightly different texture.
Well, that's what I wondered about, because you don't cook the pasta. You start out with the olive oil and throw it in, and
you saute it first, and then it does end up simmering. But because it's sautéed first while it's dry, and after it does simmer in the saucepan, it's a different texture. But we like it a lot, and it's a one-pot meal. So.
Well, you know what I liked about the recipes too, because certainly there's a lot of books that have been written with recipes, and sometimes they don't have anything to do with the story. And there aren't a lot of recipes in this book, but they're in strategic places, and they have a feel that they are part of it all. And the little notes that you've included, the mother character in the book was she sends out a newsletter, isn't that right? Along with her recipes.
That's right. Yeah, she has a newsletter that she does for many years, and that's one thing that Olivia takes on when her mother dies. She decides to finish that last issue that her mother was working on, which is a painful task for her, but something that she feels she needs to do.
Yeah. Now, what period of time does the book cover for my listeners? How long a period is involved in it?
It takes place pretty much in the summer of 1996. Mm-hmm. Really, just a couple of months.
Mm-hmm. What would you like your readers to take away from this story? Because, as I said, it's filled with a lot of subjects, and so what is it that you want us to think about or learn at the end of this book?
I think the main thing would be that if you are grieving for someone, that you need to take the time to grieve in the way that you need to grieve. And I think that our society doesn't do a good job of helping people grieve. There's sort of a, get back to it sort of mentality, and that doesn't work for everyone.
Get over it.
Don't let people rush you. Do what you need to do to grieve the way you need to grieve. Mm-hmm.
Now, does that come from your own experience also?
It does, yeah. It does. That certainly emotionally is something that I experienced, yep.
Yeah, which is, it's very tough, and certainly it was a good way to deal with it by putting it in the story. Now, you're just starting out, of course, so I hate to ask you what's next, but because you're starting on talking about your book, but have you got something in mind now that you're working on or hope to work on?
I do have a novel in mind that I am hoping to dive into. I haven't been able to get going this summer, but I definitely am looking forward to diving into the next one that's been simmering in my head for a while. So.
Yeah, and I got some information from your PR people, and it says in here that you do have background in technical writing, and you're doing that freelance in order to continue with your writing. Is that right?
Yes, that's been a great support sort of career for doing fiction. I used to teach, and I loved teaching, but I didn't get any writing done. I just couldn't balance them. And I do technical writing. Sometimes I also do some test item writing, standardized test item writing, which I love doing. That's a lot of fun. And that's all on a freelance basis, so it's very flexible.
And you mentioned your son. How old is your son?
He's about 4 3/4.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it, that he's a fussy eater, because I've got 2 boys, and one when he was young was very fussy, and the other one just ate everything.
My goodness, it's
I don't know. It is a challenge.
His idea of a great meal is a mayonnaise sandwich.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let him have it. Well, listen, Susan, good luck on your book. We are out of time, and thanks so much for being with us. I hope you'll come back with your next book.